周恩来的发言，中华人民共和国外交部长。Statement by Zhou Enlai, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. This statement was issued on February 24, 1952, in support of the protest made on February 22, 1952 by Bak Hun-young, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Korean Democratic People's Republic. According to the authenticated data available at the field headquarters of the Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteers and the American aggressor troops have, since January 28, 1952, repeatedly employed on a scale larger than before bacteriological weapons which are aimed at slaughtering the peaceful people of Korea, the Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteers. Bak Hun-young, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Korean Democratic People's Republic, issued on February 22nd of this year a statement protesting against these new crimes and calling on the people of the whole world to check the atrocities of the American imperialists and investigate and define the international responsibility of those who organize the employment of bacteriological weapons. I am authorized to formally state that the Central People's Government of the Chinese People's Republic and the Chinese people fully support this just stand of the government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. As is universally known, this is not the first time that American imperialism has used bacteriological weapons in its war of intervention in Korea. As early as during the period from December 1950 to January 1951, the American aggressor troops disseminated smallpox viruses in Pyongyang, Gangwon Province, South Hamgyong Province, Hwanghae Province and several other areas while retreating southward across the 38th parallel under the combined blows of the Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteers. The recent criminal act of the American aggressor troops in repeatedly scattering by aircraft large quantities of germ-carrying insects over the frontline positions and in the rear of the Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteers has provided further proof that the United States government is continuing planned and premeditated germ warfare in a completely inhuman manner. The people of the whole world, squarely faced with the facts, cannot but identify the United States government as the first war criminal in the world today, which, in pursuance of its aggressive war, does not scruple to use bacteriological weapons in violation of all international conventions. In its machinations to undermine world peace and prepare for world war, American imperialism first employed Shiro Ishii, Jiro Wakamatsu, Masajo Kitano, and other Japanese bacteriological war criminals whose hands have long been stained with the blood of the Chinese and Korean people to carry out on the Korean battlefield experiments and manufacture of various types of lethal bacteria. Hundreds and thousands of the captured personnel of the Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteers have been victims of experiments with these bacteriological weapons. And now, American imperialism is using these tested bacteriological weapons to slaughter the peaceful people of Korea. If the people of the world do not resolutely put an end to this crime, then the calamities befalling the peaceful people of Korea today will befall the peaceful people of the world tomorrow. The criminal act of American imperialism in waging bacteriological warfare has thus proved that American imperialism is the most dangerous foe of the Chinese and Korean people and the peaceful people of the whole world. It must be pointed out that American imperialism was forced to conduct armistice negotiations after receiving shattering blows at the hands of the heroic Korean People's Army and the Chinese People's Volunteers during the War of Intervention, which it launched in Korea. Nevertheless, American imperialism is not willing to accept its defeat. In the negotiations, it resorts to all sorts of shameless delaying tactics to obstruct the progress of the negotiations on the one hand, and callously conducts brutal germ warfare on the other. It attempts by these means to prolong and extend the Korean War and achieve its aggressive designs to destroy the People's Republic of China and undermine peace and security in the Far East. The Chinese people are determined to smash, and inevitably will smash, the shameless machinations and criminal acts of American imperialism. American imperialism will not only fail to attain its criminal ends, but will, without doubt, ignominiously pay the penalty for its crimes before the just wrath of the peaceful people of the whole world. On behalf of the Chinese people, I charge the United States government before the people of the whole world with the heinous crime of employing bacteriological weapons in violation of all principles of humanity and international conventions to slaughter peaceful citizens and armed fighters in Korea. I call on the peace-loving people all over the world to take steps to put an end to the fratricide, criminal acts of the United States government. The Chinese people, together with the people throughout the world, will struggle to the very end to halt the fratricide crimes of the United States government.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hello and welcome to the Return of the Repressed, dear listener. Welcome to another Patreon exclusive episode of the third season of Bio, Peace and Warfare. I am especially happy to sit down on my black cushion with you because I have done more than watch my posture and light incense lately. This series is especially close to my heart as I recognize it as something of a tagline, to borrow a commercial term, for the whole show. I went on a road trip to track down the last standing headquarters of the Japanese biological warfare program once it went into Gladio mode. I posted about this upon my return home on the Patreon and on Twitter with pictures, so check that out if you missed it. Of course, I couldn't help but to start today's episode without mentioning this field report, since it's about as original as a researching podcast can aspire to be. Talking to an old white-haired man in the makeshift museum with my translator really made me feel like I'm bringing something new to the table. I hope most of you stick around on the Patreon until we reach a point where I can safely excuse myself from family life and take longer research trips to, well, why not Manchukuo, for example, since I speak the language, and perhaps interview some of the last living people with unexplained, non-healing blisters over there that has been pussing for more than half a century. It will also hopefully help us throughout today's episode, which is taking this season on a slight byway, inspired by what I saw out there in the guerrilla temples and half-abandoned wooden villages on the beatific, green, forgotten terraced foothills of the Akaishi Alp range. Where once rice was replaced by low-maintenance acacia buckwheat before it was replaced by whatever the subtropical forest would throw at it. Man, the amount of Vietnamese coffee that went into getting this episode ready for you. As the intro foretold, we are starting further ahead in time, more especially the closely linked Korean War, from which we will move our way back to the famines of the early 30s, which is our designated goal of deepened revelation. In the last episode, I gave you a rather good rundown of the formative years of the anti-Soviet propaganda campaign organized by a loose network of primarily 3 separate historical blocks. These were 1. The warmongering British news mogul aristocrats of what I called the tidbit sphere, which broke with the old Victorian satirical tradition of gas lamps and ushered in the first electrified populist mass media with all the instinctual gore and stupidity which we today perhaps associate with primarily the Murdoch press, in which every event has that fake Jack the Ripper flair. Furthermore, it also involved our second block, crafted by the Yellow King of Carcosa, Randolph William Hearst, who had been manipulating the opinions and desires of civil society ever since he got the United States onto its current imperialist train of history, by interpolating popular support for its war with Spain, which in a very symbolic fashion outed the first modern, by then many centuries old, Western colonial power, the Iberian, and in so doing introduced to the world stage the latest and contemporary, the American. The propaganda campaign also involved, perhaps above all else, the just-birthed, infantile Nazi Germany, number 3, so-called, also in other contexts, which was at this very moment going through what is often recognized as its Gleichschaltung, the sameness alignment, if I was to have a go at a literal translation. It's a Nazification process, in short, which entailed in the very first year seizing political power over all the other state apparatuses not granted them by their mere democratic parliamentarian victory, as the Big H addressed the nation as a Reich Chancellor for the first time in February 1933. His brain doctors of the written and spoken word slowly began to reorientate the meaning production of the totality under the master signifier of their hasted appropriation. A process in which the Holodomor mythology, of course, just like the Reichstag fire, produced a very convincing common enemy as to distract and simultaneously soothe the folk soul, which involved even many of the German working classes, once sympathetic to the socialist and communist solutions to their increasing problems. As Goebbels so succinctly points out when he exclaims to a rally of that year at the first big rally in the Berlin Sportspalast, February 10, 1933, where he just short of a decade later would do the Totale Krieg speech. I know many of you once sympathized with the socialists and the trade unions, but look at this. Do these poverty-stricken makeshift organizations pay for these kinds of new fancy speakers that can reach the whole world and over 20 million German listeners, like our industrialists' backers? He did not put it in those exact words, but the Schweinhund von Düsseldorf will just have to excuse me from the grave for putting words into his mouth. as to elaborate the process by which the Holodomor myth made sure that the NSDAP could complete its process of situating itself in the symbolic placeholder of truth, solution, and problem. We will, in a coming episode, study the adjectives and the superlatives of his phrasing when telling the story of the shortage of wheat in the Slavic Soviets, but in that Augenblick of hatching. 1933-34, when the press of the Western liberal democratic states sounded exactly the same as the fascists, the NSDAP could almost unhindered save the Jewish-controlled press in Berlin, so-called, under such favorable international conditions, begin to prepare, with less complaints, to do what they had said all along that they would do, which was to start a war against the Bolsheviks and the Marxists. We know that they spilled no time, and under the new media-amplified auspice of a famine genocidal political enemy in the Red East, Dachau was opened just 1 moon's passing later on the 22nd of March 1933, where I went in my 20s to pay my respects to the comrades, and which will probably remain the only KZ lager I visit, because smelling that blood-filled Boden is tough on the stomach. It became the first regular concentration camp established by the coalition government of the National Socialist German Workers' Party and the German National People's Party, before that party was dissolved on the 6th of July 1933 in the summer of that year, as the fields of gold began to sway in the western wind. Dachau was, according to Hitler, in an interview with the daily broadsheet Münchener Neueste Nachrichten, quote, the first concentration camp for political prisoners. As I said, and will say again many times tonight, because I always bite off more than I can chew, we will get into more of those details eventually, and how fascist propaganda doesn't want to tell a ghost story about the ghost of communism simply for the thrill of it, but because it's the basis of its reactionary reason for being, in the eyes of the industrialists who pay and paid for their campaigning. Big ag and chem industrialists who, as we saw, had lost their factories and their capitalist interests in the single biggest national arable landmass on the planet when the Bolsheviks took power. When we do return after these byway episodes to the anti-communist propaganda campaign, in particular, picking up where we left off in the last episode with the fraudulent photographs of Hearst's grifter, Walker, standing trial for forgery, we will, as promised, follow the red thread up until our days as the campaign was revived again and again in 4 waves, so that we can better understand why the price of wheat flour and the bread of the Big Mac index is going haywire right now. But to make sure that you don't get bored of me reading old newspapers, to make the same point 4 times from a multitude of angles about the same Holodomor, I have decided it's time for something different. And though I promised a rundown of the organization of agriculture and a history of the collectivization process of the Union in those faraway days, I have decided that it will be the episode of another coming break in the newspaper narrative. All this is perhaps a bit methodologically unwise. Some would say that involving what I am about to involve harms my case more than anything else, as it will increase, most definitely, the amplitude of uncertainty. But come on, this is the Patreon of the Return of the Repressed, after all. And you, the most dearest of listeners, know that is maybe what I do best. And so without further ado, I will tonight open up the very speculative and highly conspiratorial suggestion that the Soviet famines during the 1930s, when every nation on the planet with an army was preparing for the ideological showdown of the century, might have been a consequence of biological warfare. Honey, he's doing that thing again. He's going after the kulaks. Last time it was Wall Street speculation a la international Jewish clique or whatever. Now it's fucking biowarfare. Plague, pest, infested rats. I don't know what the fuck. Sorry dear, I'm completely tapped out.
가야 할 사람이 안녕 안녕이라고 말해야지 돌아설 사람이기에 안녕이라고 말해야지 울먹이는 마음일랑 나 혼자 사귀면서 웃으며 말해야지 안녕 안녕 가야 할 사람이기에 안녕 안녕이라고 말해야지 마음일랑 나 혼자 살면서 웃으며 말해야지 안녕 안녕 가야 할 사람이기에 라고 말해야지
First things first.